Brandon Aiyuk. Obviously, he tweeted today, and I'll repeat the tweet
Yeah.
just so that we're clear. 1K is the fourth option in a run first offense. Laugh emoji, laugh emoji. I'm as real as it get to the word. I'm as real as it get word to Lil Baby and SG. I'm ready to stand on business every time. Year 4, rockets up, rockets up, rockets up emojis. And I said that I didn't think the tweet meant that much because I didn't feel like Brandon Aiyuk was getting an extension this offseason no matter what. The 49ers have some flexibility with him since he was a first round pick. I thought his fifth year option would get picked up, and I thought this offseason's focus would be the Nick Bosa's extension. And then you can circle back to Aiyuk next offseason when you might, have a little bit more flexibility on what you're doing in terms of contracts. And there's a few guys that, may no longer be a part of this roster depending on how attrition goes and age goes for them this upcoming season. And so that's what I thought. I thought the tweet actually, Larry, what I just read from Brandon Aiyuk spoke more to his self-confidence. And a good friend of ours, of course, Last Second Sports, Jesse Naylor, I thought he summed up the translation to Ayuk's words pretty succinctly. And he said, "Pay me my worth. I will produce no matter what, and we'll prove it again this season." And I thought that's all it was. I thought it's Brandon Aiyuk telling you, yeah, I'm a big-time player. I had a big-time season. He was the 49ers' most consistent weapon this entire football season. And I thought that consistency and urgency were the two things that really improved in his game. He was very deliberate in every single route he ran. And he was very urgent about getting open. There was less messing around and more getting to where he needed to be on time and on schedule. I thought he played more physically this year. And then, of course, his consistency, the fact that he was healthy the entire season, he produced in every game. And I thought he took major strides in all aspects of his game as well, Larry, just to add on, right? I understand why he's tweeting that way, right? Because he is clearly the fourth option. They feature Christian McCaffrey, Kittle, and Debo more than him. That's just a fact on the 49ers offense. And you could argue he would put up more stats if he was featured elsewhere. But the point is, he had a terrific season, and he not only had a terrific season as a wide receiver, I thought he was the best blocker on the team in terms of his blocking on the outside. I thought he was sealing the edge. He was a lead blocker on some plays. He had different roles, and he was asked to do different things as a blocker, especially sealing the edge, and I thought he did a phenomenal job. And I think I love his self-confidence, and I think he's right. Rockets are up for him, and he's got to prove it again this year as the fourth option on a run-first offense. What did you think of that entire saga?
Well, I mean, he was their best receiver this year. So he played the full schedule. I believe him and Ray were the only offensive weapons that played the full 17, at least among the receivers.
Right.
So I mean, he stayed healthy. He caught 78 balls. It would have been 98 balls if he was on a different team.
Right.
Instead of he went for 1,000 yards, it would have been 1,200 yards or more easily on a worse team. He had 8 touchdowns on a team where Kittle had a bust out end of the year with 11. I think Aiyuk, we all know the story. He's due for a contract extension. He's under contract for 2 more years. Niners aren't going to give him one. They're just going to let him play it out. He's now saying, I don't know if he's saying he's tired of being the fourth option, because I talked to him late in the year. He's a team guy, man. This guy shows up to win.
The way he
but I
blocks
think
really emphasizes that, right?
What's that?
The way he blocks really emphasizes that. I don't think that ever gets enough credit. He kicks ass in the run game, and he did it all year last year.
Well, and just the way he talks about the game when you're around him in the locker room, he's not like a big me guy. He's about the team and about the winning. So I like that. I think he's a terrific young receiver. He's coming into his own, who would have bigger numbers on other teams. I think in some ways he's kind of saying, "Get me the damn ball." A little bit of a message to Kyle Shanahan. Get me the ball. Give me an opportunity to make some cash for my family. I'd like to see them run Aiyuk a little bit more. We see runs to Debo. We don't see runs to Aiyuk. Why not? I mean, Aiyuk can run with the ball. I think he's another guy who's absolutely electric with the ball in his hands. He was a return guy, for crying out loud. Get him the ball in a couple returns. Get him the ball in a couple end arounds. He's an explosive player, and he can take a hit in the open field and hold on to the football. So, um, you know, there's also a lot of speculation that he would like to try to force a trade here, and that he might want to be elsewhere. I don't know his situation. I would expect a big year either way, but I think he's just kind of saying, "Hey, I've been over here. I'm quietly doing my thing. I'm badass, even though I only have good, solid to very good stats, and everybody knows it because I'm in this run heavy offense with all these other weapons. I'm in my prove it year. I want an extension." And I think in some ways he's just kind of throwing that all out there. I'm not saying that he's saying he's tired of being the fourth option, but he's at least acknowledging that he is the fourth option and that he's a team guy and it's all working and they're winning games. But I think cut through the BS and it's like, hey, give me the damn ball. It would be the same equivalent of Keyshawn Johnson saying, give me the damn ball. Get me the damn ball more and let me touch it more so I can make more cash. But if you look at the numbers, Kittle caught 60 balls, Debo caught 56 balls, McCaffrey caught 52 balls, Jawan caught 35, Juszczyk out of the backfield with 19, Ray had 14, Brandon Aiyuk had 78. So, and he was far and away the most targeted receiver. Debo was targeted 94 times in 13 games. Aiyuk was targeted 114 times, most on the team in 17 games. So he had a good year. It could have been better. And I think he's just kind of saying, he's expressing a little frustration. He either wants to get paid or he wants to get just the touches so that he can get paid. But he's also kind of like announcing, hey, you know what? I know like where I am in the whole pecking order. I know everything that's going on. I'm fully aware. So let's not play games. My value. I'm more valuable. He's basically saying I'm more valuable than my stats, and I want the ball more. That's what I'm taking out of that.
And I think that last part is really, really important because I think ultimately this does come to about his contract. And I don't think it's necessarily about his contract with him being paid, but he is already prepping himself for the kind of conversation that's going to start when he enters his extension. And the important thing with Aiyuk is he's still an ascending player. The improvement that he made from year 2 to year 3, I know a lot of people put the year 2 struggles on just say Shanahan put him in the doghouse, but Brandon Aiyuk also did not play well for a portion of the season. There was a lack of urgency in how he ran his routes. And sometimes he was, not as physical as he could have been off the line of scrimmage. There was also a growth process for him involved. And you could see that in the growth of all aspects of his game this year, right? You talked about his run after the catch ability, use him more in jet sweeps. I thought one of the best things about Brandon Aiyuk is not only how good, and I talked about the urgency before he gets the ball, right? With how physical he was and how ready he was to get to the spot on time, but just how quick then he was just turning his shoulder upfield and how explosive and physical he was right after the catch. It felt like the first guy never took him down this year, no matter where he caught the ball, which to me is very, very important in the modern NFL with so much space and the run after the catch ability of these players. Now, I think the way he tweeted this out was actually very beautiful because I think it sends the message without putting anybody else down. He says, I understand, like, okay, I'm the fourth option. And he says, I understand Debo Samuel, is a 1,400-yard first-team All-Pro wide receiver that just got paid $25 million a year. I understand Christian McCaffrey's a first-team All-Pro running back. I understand that, George Kittle is a first-team All-Pro tight end. I understand that our offense is run first. I understand all of these things. But don't come here when it comes to my contract time and say, hey, Brandon, you barely got 1,000 yards. Or, hey, Brandon, you only deserve this much money because you've never been a Pro Bowl receiver and all of that. Like, I'm still that good. It's just our situations like this, so my stats are like this. I think that's all he's doing. I don't think he's complaining or saying he wants the ball more. He's just saying, don't lowball me because my numbers are affected by the fact that our team is really, really good and we run the ball more. And I thought the way he tweeted it out, the timing, I thought it was beautiful. I thought the way he handled it was beautiful because he's not putting anybody down. Ultimately, he's saying, I'm that guy and I'm going to show you again this year. So I love the confidence, but he's also saying like, hey, don't, and when it comes to this negotiation, we both know that I'm really, really good. Let's not pretend to use all of these things against me when we know why my stats aren't a little bit better. And I thought the way he handled that was fantastic.
Well, and to me, when you look at the Niners stats, the one thing that just jumps out is that Ray McCloud and Brandon Aiyuk combined for the year had 6 total runs. Ray had 4, Aiyuk had 2. 2 in 17 games. I want to see Aiyuk carry the football. I want to see
And one of
get
those was
him
the
the
first
ball.
one of those was the first in the first drive of the season, by the way. Like, I think the
And
first drive of the season with Lance was jet sweep to
16-yard
Debo,
run.
jet sweep to Aiyuk.
Yeah, I mean, he can be an explosive runner. How about Ray McCloud though? By the way, Ray McCloud had
Right.
4 carries on the season. One of them was a 71-yard touchdown run. It's like a guy hits the corner and goes for 71-yard touchdown run, and you only give him 4 carries on the year. I mean, that maybe, in hindsight looks like a tad low, doesn't it? I mean, I'd like Aiyuk and Ray to get the ball schemed into their hands on running plays. I mean, like by comparison, Debo ran it 42 times.
Yeah.
They can run the ball with Aiyuk and Ray a little bit more and get a few dynamic plays and diversify their rushing attack.
Yeah, I agree. I think health did play a factor into the usage of all these different guys, because ultimately Ayuk was really the only guy in this offense that had a consistently healthy season, right? Debo played banged up for quite a few weeks there in between, and then he ultimately had that very nasty injury that turned out to be fairly mild. Kittle was hurt for the entire first part of the season. Again, he came back versus Denver, but he was playing hurt for the first part of the season. McCaffrey got banged up there in between. Ayuk was really the only guy who stayed healthy. And I wonder if perhaps they kind of protected him from taking a few extra hits in the run game just because he was that one receiver that was healthy. And they put a little bit more on him, right? Like, in the sense that he became kind of their isolated X receiver. They put a little bit more on him in the pass game than they have in the past, where they featured him a little bit more than they have in the past. Maybe not as much as they should have, but definitely more than they have in the past. And then he was kicking butt in the run game, Larry. I cannot reiterate that enough, how well he sealed the edge the entire season last year. James Foster in the comment section says Brandon Aiyuk is Isaac Bruce. Me and Vish agree on this. So I don't know if I necessarily agree on this. I know this is the comparison Shanahan used.
He's a Hall of Famer now. He's a Hall of Famer.
And just so we're clear, right? Isaac Bruce had 1,700 yards in his second season in the NFL. I think he led the league in receiving his third season in the NFL. Like, he was he was not a first ballot Hall of Famer, but he was a early ballot Hall of Famer, and he was a hell of a player. I think Shanahan was making the comparison with who they are as athletes in terms of how fluid they are in terms of their hips, in terms of being able to change direction. And there is a little bit of a specialness to Brandon Aiyuk in terms of his ability to reaccelerate and decelerate in and out of his breaks. That's why he's such a smooth athlete, right? That's why a lot of people think he's such a better route runner than Debo Samuel. Really, it's just the athleticism. Aiyuk is just a much more fluid and smoother athlete than Debo, who, wins a little bit more with explosion, physicality, and leverage, whereas Aiyuk, has that incredible ability to change direction without really losing a lot of speed. He's a very, very smooth athlete, and there's the Isaac Bruce comparison. Now, in terms of being actually Isaac Bruce as a player, I know a lot of people think Aiyuk's stats would be a lot better in different situations, and I agree with that. But Isaac Bruce was putting up 1,700 yards, 1,300 yards in not so great situations earlier in his career as well. I understand the comparison. I'm hesitant to go that far because of what a great player Isaac Bruce was. But certainly Aiyuk's talent as an athlete is special. What do you think, Larry?
I think Aiyuk's terrific. I mean, let's not call Mike Bruce yet, but there's no rip on that. Ike Bruce was a star. But Brandon Aiyuk's got huge talent. What I love the most about him is that there's the middle is not for the meek in the NFL. And this guy runs across the middle with no fear at all. None. I mean, it's awesome. I mean, that's the one thing about the Niners receivers. When you watch the Niners and you watch Debo and Jawan and Brandon Aiyuk, I mean, and Kittle, they're just going for the ball in the middle of the field. Other teams, guys are looking for defenders, and guys are alligator arming it and short arming it and looking around. And the Niners play the middle of the field with just this total courage. They own their receivers feel like they own the middle of the field. And so they finish out their routes, and it's great for Purdy. It was great for Jimmy. You know what I mean? If you're a quarterback,
Right.
man, you're going to throw that in cutter, or you're going to throw that slant against real tight man coverage. You know, that's a really tiny window, and you need your receiver to go for the ball. You can't just, if he just turns it down, it's like, it's kind of crowded in there, I don't want to go in there. That's a pick, maybe a pick six.
So some insight into this. I like listening to Chris Sims. I've listened to him for many years back to his Bleacher Report days because he obviously talks very positively about his friend Shanahan. And something he said about his friend Shanahan for years is that's actually something he scouts in his receivers. So what you're talking about specifically, he looks for that as a trait where he looks for guys that go over the middle of the field and snatch the ball out of the air and catch it without losing speed. And Deebo Samuel is a fantastic example of this. He didn't have as many of these plays this year, but his rookie season, I actually thought, it's funny because I thought Debo's second year and fourth year kind of mirrored each other. And then his rookie year and third year kind of mirrored each other, where he was in great shape, didn't get hurt, and was fantastic the entire season in year one and year three. And then in year two and year four, I thought he just was playing hurt the entire season. And he was a little bit heavier and he just didn't have that same extra gear. But anyway, the touchdown versus the Packers as a rookie, the big play versus Tennessee. There's so many different examples of Debo catching an in cut, right, and just outrunning the entire defense. And so that is definitely something Shanahan scouts. And like you mentioned, it's not only Debo, it's not only Kittle. Brandon Aiyuk definitely has that trait. Juwan Jennings definitely has that trait. Even I would say Ray McLeod, in the little bit we got to see him for a smaller guy, Ray McLeod is tough as nails. And the 49ers clearly value toughness with their receivers as a football team. And I would say, while we're on the topic of Danny Gray and rookies, that need to get on the field, I would say that that's a little bit not a question mark in Danny Gray's game, because I think he is really tough, but playing through contact better is definitely something that would do Danny Gray wonders in terms of him getting on the field next year.
No doubt. No doubt. I talked to Charvarius Ward at the end of the year about, the Niner receivers, and we were just going through it and, one by one. And when it got to Danny Gray, he's like, oh man, that boy's fast. He'll eat up that cushion on you real quick. And he had a funny way of saying it too. But then he also talked about how he's pretty raw in like a lot of the route running and nuances of selling it. And it's just, you think of receiver, it's such a glamour position, but man, it's such a technique rich position. And it's getting open in college against college corners is totally different than getting open in these tight NFL windows where the timing has to be just perfect. The windows are tiny, the competition's intense. So it's just a totally different deal. And it's rare that you see somebody step out of college onto the perimeter in the NFL, whether it be on either side of the ball, corner or receiver, and really dominate. And that's why Sauce Gardner is so special. That's why
Right.
that story watching him this year was so compelling, because he did exactly what we're talking about. He stepped right out of college and just dominated NFL receivers. So it's hard to do out there. So I expect, Danny Gray is going to be stronger. He's going to have better knowledge of the offense. He's going to have a better rhythm with the quarterbacks. And he's got big time speed. So he's not afraid either. So he told me he's got a touchdown dance all ready for us. I tried to pry it out of him. I'm like, come on, can you give it to me a little bit? Can you give me a little something, what you got? And he's like, I'm going to keep it under wraps. But when he scores, wait for Danny Gray to just go off, because he's got moves.
All right, I'm going to be looking forward to that. To kind of put a
look for Danny's moves
on the Aiyuk discussion, because I think ultimately, right, we agreed that the tweet is regarding his contract and ultimately how much they're going to pay him. I think you and I are on the same page that this offseason is likely not going to be the offseason Aiyuk gets his extension. If anything, it will be next offseason, because they'll probably pick up his fifth-year option, do the Bosa extension, and let him play it out, because you never know what's going to happen. And I don't know if Aiyuk, as good as he is, has shown enough consistency for them to be on the same page necessarily of where his contract is, because obviously there was probably some disappointment with him his second season. I mean, that entire situation of doghouse, not doghouse, ended up being the doghouse was an entire ordeal. Um, and while he did have a really, really excellent season overall, it wasn't like he was Debo Samuel 2 years ago having a first team all pro season. So you know exactly, hey, what his worth is, because he's kind of in a tricky spot as his tweet indicated, where he's a lot better than what his stats show, but his stats also show, good numbers, not great numbers. And so I think that it would be great to watch it play out this year. The one thing I would just add to the IU discussion ultimately that I think is important when we're discussing his contract is that he's an ascending player. And I think that's really important. He is really getting better day by day. He's still growing. And I was somebody that was maybe not, I was a little bit, hey, what's going on with Brandon Aiyuk during his second year? Maybe he's just, a number two receiver, because I thought, there was also a little bit of he kind of went into a shell with that entire situation was going on, and he seemed to be like totally a little bit not himself and all of that. And there's a confidence, there's an alpha. I don't want to say alpha, but there's a mentality that you see with the number one receiver, right? You watch Jamar Chase, it's not just that Jamar Chase is a superstar. The confidence that he plays with also exudes that he's the effing man. And I thought Debo always exuded that confidence, but Aiyuk really exuded that confidence this year. And that's where I made a mistake as somebody, who's like Aiyuk growing in this. And I didn't realize that there was still a growth there with him. And I think that that's really, really important when we're talking about ultimately paying him, Krug, because I think it's a little bit different, because while a lot of the other 49ers players who have been paid at a similar age, I think a lot of them did it after their best season, like Kittle and Debo. And it's likely that they'll have a lot of really, really good seasons, but it won't be as good as the season that they had right before they had paid. I think a lot of Ayuk's best football is ahead of him when he's 28, 29, 30. And I think that that's what's really interesting about the entire conversation of paying him, which will ultimately probably take place next year, because he is very much an ascending football player. And I thought the growth, I cannot reiterate enough, the growth he showed in all aspects of his game, year 2 to year 3, is so exciting. And what he does as a blocker just doesn't get enough credit. And it's definitely something you can rely upon moving forward, because like you said, Krug, he's such a team guy.
I mean, they just got to target him more. I mean, I'm looking at the game log. There's 6 games this year, Vish, where he was targeted 4 times or less. 6 games out of 17. 4 times or less. This guy's supposed to be your number one guy. You got it, so that, I mean, he went off against the Raiders, 12 catches, 101 yards, and a touchdown. He had a big night on the Monday nighter against Arizona. When I say big night, he scored 2 touchdowns. It was 4 catches for 20 yards. He had 11 catches, he had 7 catches against Kansas City for 82 yards. Next week, he had 8 catches for 83 yards and 2 touchdowns against Atlanta. But, I mean, this guy, they're in the last 5 weeks of the regular season, or the first 5 weeks of the regular season this year, he scored 1 touchdown. He had 1 touchdown going into middle of October. I mean, he's got to start the season faster. You look at it, targeted 3 times by Trey Lance in week 1 for 2 catches. Seattle game, 8 targets, 5 catches. 8 targets is about what I think he ought to be getting, about 2 a quarter on average.
Okay, I have a theory.
6 games of 4 or less, that's bad. And he had multiple games with 3 or less targets. I mean, come on, man. You got to throw this guy the ball more, get him more involved, let him touch it a little bit more. 2 carries all year. He carried once in week 1 and not again until week 16. I mean, come on. I want to see a little bit more diversified attack. I want to see him touch the ball more. He's dynamic.
I 100% agree with you, Krug. And I felt like, look, he had games of production with Garoppolo, right? Like the Chargers game he produced, this first Rams or the second Rams game, he had a pretty good game and all of that. And he had games that weren't as good with Purdy, I guess, but I felt like there was a little bit better chemistry there between um him and Purdy versus him and Garoppolo. And I think that just had to do with the fact that Purdy just plays with better timing than Garoppolo. And that timing is so important. And I felt like Jimmy G got away a lot with being late because of how special his release is and how easy it was for him to flick the ball out. But I think the fact that Purdy always was on time and on schedule going to him did, definitely benefit him because he was a very precise receiver this year. I think that was the most, the biggest improvement of his game. Everything was deliberate, everything was extremely precise, very detailed. The way he blocked, I can't talk about it enough. But I I'm with you, Krug. They got to target him more. And I think, again, of the 40, I would say actually of all the 49ers weapons, Krug, I would say he's the only one I can confidently say is an ascending player. I don't know if I can confidently say Christian McCaffrey is ascending at this point in his career. I don't know if I can
Oh, I mean that, yeah.
confidently
Tay
say that about
Martin. I mean,
Debo's.
Tay Martin and Danny Gray are getting better.
I meant of the
Tay
stars and the
Martin,
starters. I meant of
yeah,
the
yeah.
stars and the starters.
But
Yeah.
but I will say this about Aiyuk. Aiyuk was so pro Purdy. He was one of the most pro Purdy guys in the entire room. And if you go back and look at Garoppolo to Aiyuk and Purdy to Aiyuk, Purdy's accuracy and timing, Garoppolo got Aiyuk smoked constantly. He was constantly getting blown up. Purdy has figured out a way to throw the slant where he waits till he's by the defender or he's got a lot of room between him and the next defender. He's threading that perfectly. I haven't seen Aiyuk take big hits on these Purdy in cutters or slants. And I think there's a trust there. And that's why you hear Aiyuk so positive for Brock because Brock's go back and look at every reception and you'll see that the Brock to Aiyuk passes resulted in a lot less physical punishment for Aiyuk than the Garoppolo to Aiyuk.
Yeah. And by the way, Larry, I just put up this comment just for you. I just wanted you to read it.
Light the beam. Stop.
No, but
Getting
I
Kings
actually think
fans.
that's a really, really good point. And that goes to where, that goes to the details, right? Because Garoppolo did play very well last year and he, got a nice
He
deal
did.
with the Raiders. And so I don't want to sit here and insult Garoppolo, but those were the little details that were why, you and I were saying Purdy's the better player. The ball placement was just a tad bit better than with Garoppolo. The timing, the accuracy was just better than with Garoppolo. He's a more consistent, intermediate, like 10 to 20-yard thrower, I would say, than Garoppolo. And so, yeah, and Michael Monahan, I'm sorry, he does bring up a good point, and I think this is the next part of kind of Ayuk's growth, right? Because he did have a few drops, and I felt like he was always kind of a play away from just one game, Larry, the one game that kind of puts him on the map, right? Like it's a national TV game. Like, for example, the wild card playoff game. Ayuk had pretty much the better season all year, but it was Debo Samuel that really took over that game, right? Or the Dallas
Yeah.
playoff game, nobody really had a good game. But in the Seattle playoff game, Ayuk dropped that crazy play by Purdy. That would have been a highlight reel play that would have put both Purdy and Ayuk on a national map and scene. And he dropped it. And he's had a few plays, and he's just a few plays away, I feel like, from really having a game or a play that really puts Ayuk on the scene and has everybody know that, hey, this is not just a guy who's consistently played very well under the radar. He's also a guy who's showing up and producing in the biggest moments. And I think it's just that lack of timing, or he's been unlucky, where that's the next part, I think, of his game where, I thought the Raiders game was a great example. Larry, you brought up the stats, but really down the stretch of that game, he had 3 big catches on that drive that they went to go tie the game and kick the field goal. And one of them was a completely errant throw from Purdy because he got hit, right? He had Kittle wide open, rolling out to his left. His arm gets hit. The ball floats straight up in the air, and Ayuk just absolutely runs it down and goes and gets that ball. It was an outstanding play. And so I think that was a great example of the fact that the potential is there. But I think that's the only thing really missing from Brandon Ayuk's ascension to superstardom. He's just that one game that's like a explosion game. That's not 6 catches, 80 yards, not 7 catches, 80 yards, a touchdown. It's 9 catches, 155 yards, 2 touchdowns. He takes over the game the way Deebo Samuel did so many different times a couple years ago. That's the only thing I think that's missing. I don't think that's all his fault either, Larry. I think sometimes he gets lost in the target distribution and sometimes they get away from getting him the ball too. So I think there's more to it than that's on him. But I think that's all that's missing. And I feel like that's going to come this year just because of the steady growth we've seen. Year 1 to year 2 was a little bit, but then the end of year 2, year 3, and now what I expect to see from him going into year 4.
Yeah, I expect him to have a bust out year. I really do. I think he's got the perfect receiver build. 6 feet, long arms, plays like 6'3".
Very
He could
smooth
be
athlete.
spectacular if they fed him. He could be right there with the best receivers in pro football if they fed him consistently. But I really think from talking to him that he's about the W. He's about the win, man. This is what the guy's about. So I respect that even more. Those are the kind of guys you want. And that's the culture that this team has. The day that the Pro Bowl was announced, yeah, there were a lot of individuals who were happy, but, ultimately it's a team sport. And these guys were very focused all year long on the team goal. And I think this is just him saying, hey, look, I know I could have better numbers. I know why I don't. And I want that contract, and I'm going for it. Whatever. I looked at it as a positive and kind of a nudge to the Niners, like, hey, if you want to pay me, if not, how about feed me the ball? It's just like I'm over here. So I got no problem with any of it today. The cryptic tweet, I think mission accomplished, message sent and properly. So I think it was a good move by Aiyuk, actually.
Yeah, I thought you summed it up beautifully there because actually, I think that's ultimately the point, right? What he did, I didn't find the tweet to be cryptic at all. I liked it, in fact, and I think he proved a point. I think he's saying, hey, I am the fourth option. That's okay. I'm not unhappy by it. But just contract time, don't forget that I'm still a stud just because my stats are what they are. Like, I'm okay with putting up these numbers. I don't think he's that bothered by it. He seems to clearly be a very team guy. But don't come here come correct with the business for him, despite the fact that he has those numbers. You must know what his contribution is. And I thought the way he summed it up was beautiful. Val Ramos asked, do the 49ers have the money
Bingo.
to afford Bosa and Ayuk? And
Yeah.
I would answer your question simply, Val, as long as they continue to not pay the quarterback. If they have 7th-round pick Brock Purdy starting, they do have the money to pay Nick Bosa or Brandon Aiyuk. What do you think, Larry? We lost.
Yes, I
Oh,
agree.
yes,
I
he's
agree.
back. He's back. There we go. Go ahead,
I'm
Larry.
back. I definitely agree. They can pay both those guys.
I think so too. And by the way, Larry, I think that, attrition is right around the corner for a few of this core anyway. I don't necessarily think the 49ers are when time comes to pay Brandon Aiyuk next year. One of my predictions is I don't necessarily think the 49ers will be paying all of Trent Williams, Eric Armstead, George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk. I think a couple of those guys will be slowly making their way out, and I think you would have a new younger core as well. I mean, it's been 3 out of 4 long seasons in a row for the 49ers. It's natural at some point that these guys can't continue to produce at the insane level they've had. And I do think the 49ers, the one thing vibe I've gotten from John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan is the moment the play slips, they're ready to move on. They're not sticking around and watching you decline because they have sentimental value to what you've contributed to the team. I mean, this was the same GM and coach that was ready to cut Navarro Bowman midway through the season with no sentimental value, but described it as, hey, we wanted Navarro to have the goodbye he should have had, but they were ready to say goodbye to him. And so I doubt they're going to be very sentimental. And I think that there will be a couple of those guys probably gone. And I think the Hargrave contract indicates that in some ways too.